My mother and father went out antique hunting. There's this one part of 2nd Avenue where all the little shops are. And one place had this box of second-hand books, and I stopped to look at them, because I always look at old books. And this one caught my eye. My hand, actually. I was going after a Tom Swift book underneath it, and it pinched me. Nita chuckled. Mine snagged me in the library, she said. I don't know. I didn't want Joanne, she's the one who beat me up. I didn't want her to get my pen, but I'm glad she didn't get this. She pulled her copy of the book out of her jacket as Kit straightened up beside her. She looked over at him. Does it work? She demanded. Does it really work? Kit stood there for a moment, looking at the replaced needles. I fixed my dog's nose, he said. A wasp stung him, and I made it go down right away. And I talked to the rock. He looked up at Nita again. Come on, he said. There's a place in the middle where the ground is bare. Let's see what happens. Together they walked to the center of the hollow, where the pine trees made a circle open to the sky, and the ground was bare dirt. Kit pulled out his willow wand and began drawing the diagram again. This one I know by heart, he said. I've started it so many times. Well, this time for sure. He got his book out of his back pocket and consulted it, beginning to write symbols into the diagram. Would you look and see if there's anything else we need for a finding spell? Sure. Nita found the necessary section in the index of her book and checked it. Just an image of the thing to be found, she said. I have to make it while you're spelling. Kit, do you know why this works? Leaves, pieces of string, designs on the ground. It doesn't make sense. Kit kept drawing. There's a chapter on advanced theory in there, but I couldn't get through it all the way. The magic is supposed to have something to do with interrupting space. Huh? Listen, that's all I could get out of it. There was this one phrase that kept turning up. Temporospatial claudication. I think that's how you say it. It's something like, space isn't really empty, it folds around objects, or words, and if you put the right things in the right place, and do the right things with them, and say the right things in the speech, magic happens. Where's the string? This one with all the knots in it? Nita reached down and picked it up. Must have fallen out of my pocket. Stand on this end, okay? He dropped one end of the string into the middle of the diagram, and Nita stepped onto it. Kit walked around her and the diagram with it, using the end of the string to trace a circle. Just before he came to the place where he had started, he used the willow wand to make a sort of figure-8 mark, a wizard's knot, the book had called it, and closed the circle with it. Kit tugged at the string as he stood up. Nita let it go, and Kit coiled it and put it away. You've got to do this part yourself, Kit said. I can't write your name for you. Each person in a spelling does their own. There's a table in there with all the symbols in it. Nita scuffed some pages aside and found it, a long list of English letters and numbers and symbols in the speech. She got down to look at Kit's name so that she could see how to write hers, and group by group began to puzzle the symbols out. Your birthday's August 25th? Uh-huh. Nita looked at the symbol for the year. They skipped you a couple of grades, huh? Yeah, it's rotten, Kit said, sounding entirely too cheerful as he said it. Nita knew that tone of voice. It was the one in which she usually answered Joanne, while trying to hide her own fear of what was sure to happen next. It wouldn't be so bad if they were my age, Kit went on, looking over Nita's shoulder and speaking absently. But they keep saying things like, if you're so smart, how come you talk so funny? His imitation of their imitation of his accent was precise and bitter. They make me sick. Trouble is, they outweigh me. Nita nodded and started to draw her name on the ground, using the substitutions and symbols that appeared in her manual. Some of them were simple and brief. Some of them were almost more complex than she believed possible, crazy amalgams of curls and twists and angles like those an insane stenographer might produce. She did her best to reproduce them and tied all the symbols together, fastening them into a circle with the same wizard's knot that Kit had used on the outer circle and on his own name. Done? Kit asked. He was standing up again, tracing the outer circle around one more time. Yep. Okay. He finished the tracing with another repetition of the wizard's knot and straightened up. Then he put his hand out, as if to feel something in the air. Good, he said. Here, come check this. Check what? Nita got up and went over to Kit. She put out her hand, as he had, and found that something was resisting the movement of her hand through the air, something that gave slightly under increased pressure, like a mattress being pushed down and then springing back again. Nita felt momentarily nervous. Can air get through this? I think so. I didn't have any trouble the last couple of times I did it. It's only supposed to seal out unfriendly influences. Nita stood there with her hand resting against nothing, and the nothing supported her weight. The last of her doubts about the existence of magic went away. She might have imagined the contents of the book, or been purposely misreading. She might have dozed off and dreamed the talking tree. But this was daylight, the waking world, and she was leaning, one-handed, on empty air. Those guys who came across you when you had this up, she said. What did they think? Oh, it worked on them, too. They didn't even understand why they couldn't get at me. They thought it was their idea to yell at me from a distance. They thought they were missing me with the BB guns on purpose, too, to scare me. It's true, what the book said. There are people who couldn't see a magic if it bit them. He glanced around the finished circle. There are other spells like this that don't need drawings after you do them the first time, and when you need them, they're there really fast, like if someone's about to try beating you up. People just kind of skid away from you. I bet, Nita said with relish. Thoughts of what else she might be able to do to Joanne flickered through her head, but she pushed them aside for the moment. What next? Next, Kit said, going to the middle of the circle and sitting down carefully so as not to smudge any of the marks he'd made. We read it, or I read most of it, and you read your name, though first you have to check my figuring. How come? Nita joined him, avoiding the lines and angles. Two-person spell. Both people always check each other's work. But your name, you check again after I do. Kit was already squinting at Nita's squiggles, so she pulled out her book again and began looking at the symbols Kit had drawn in the dirt. There were clearly two sides to the diagram, and the book said they both had to balance, like a chemical equation. Most of the symbols had numerical values attached, for ease in balancing, and Nita started doing addition in her head, making sure both sides matched. Eventually she was satisfied. She looked again at her name, seeing nothing wrong. Is it okay? Yeah. Kit leaned back a little. You have to be careful with names, it says. They're a way of saying what you are. And if you write something in a spell that's not what you are, well... You mean you change? Because the spell says you're something else than what you are? You become that? Kit shrugged, but he looked uneasy. A spell is saying that you want something to happen, he said. If you say your name wrong... Nita shuddered. And now? Now we start. You do your name when I come to it. Then the goal part down there, since it's a joint goal, we say it together. Think you can do it okay if I go slow? Yeah. Kit took a deep breath with his eyes closed, then opened his eyes and began to read. Nita had never heard a voice speaking a spell aloud before, and the effect was strange. Ever so slightly, ever so slowly, things began to change around her. The tree-sheltered quiet grew quieter. The cool light that filtered through the canopy of branches grew expectant, fringed with secrecy, the way things seen through the edge of a lens are fringed with rainbows. Nita began to feel as if she was caught in the moment between a very vivid dream and the awakening from it. There was that feeling of living in a body, of being aware of familiar surroundings and the realities of the daylight world waiting to be resumed, yet at the same time seeing those surroundings differently, colored with another sort of light, another kind of time. On one level, Nita heard Kit reciting a string of polysyllables that should have been meaningless to her, words for symbols, pieces of words, babble. Yet she could also hear Kit talking, saying casually, and it seemed in English, "We need to know something, and we suggest this particular method of finding the information." And the words didn't break the expectancy, the listening silence. For once, for the first time, the dream was real while Nita was awake. Power stirred in the air around her and waited for her to shape it. Magic. She sat and listened to Kit. With each passing second, she could catch more clearly the clean, metallic taste of the equation as it began to form itself, flickering chill and bright in her mind. Kit's speech was giving it life, and with quiet, flowing efficiency it was going about its purpose. It was invoking the attention of what Nita might have called physical laws, except that there was nothing physical about them. They had to do with flows of a kind of power as different from ordinary energy as energy was from matter. The equation stretched and coiled and caught those powers within itself as the words wove it. Nita and Kit were caught in it too. To Nita it seemed as if, without moving, she held out her hands, and they were taken, by Kit, and by the spell itself, and by the ponderous powers caught across from her in the dance. There was a pause. Kit looked across the diagrams at her. Nita scowled at the symbols beside her and began to read them, slowly and with some hesitation, naming herself one concept or one symbol at a time, binding herself into the spell. At first she was scared, for she could feel the strangeness folding in close around her. But then she realized that nothing awful was happening, and as her name became part of the spell, that was what was sliding down around her, protecting her. She finished, and she was out of breath and excited, and she had never been happier in her life. Kit's voice came in again then, picking up the weave, rejoining the dance. So it went for a while, the strange words and the half-seen, half-felt movements and images falling into a rhythm of light and sound and texture, a song, a poem, a spell. It began to come whole all around them, and all around the tingling air stayed still to better hold the words, and the trees bent close to listen. Kit came to the set of symbols that stood for his name and who he was, and read them slowly and carefully. Nita felt the spell settle down around him, too. He finished it and glanced up at Nita, and together they began the goal section of the spell. Nita did her best to make a clear image of the pen as she spoke, the silver case gone a little scratched and grubby now, her initials incised up on the top. She hardly had time to wonder at the harmony their paired voices made before things began to change again. The shadows of the trees around them seemed to grow darker. The aura of expectancy grew sharp enough to taste. The silence became total, and their voices fell into it, as into a great depth. The formula for their goal, though longer than either of their names had been, seemed to take less time to say, and even stranger, it began to sound like much more than just finding a pen and being left alone. It began to taste of starfire and night and motion, huge and controlled, utterly strange. Saying the formula left Kit and Nita breathless and drained, as if something powerful had briefly been living and speaking through them and had worn them down. They finished the formula together and gulped for air and looked at each other in half-frightened expectation, wondering what would happen next. The completed spell took effect. Nita had thought that she would gradually begin to see something, the way things had changed gradually in the grove. The spell, though, had its own ideas. Quick as a gasp, it slammed them both out of one moment and into another. A shocking, wrenching transition, like dreaming that you've fallen out of bed. Wham! Instinctively, they both hung on to the spell as if onto a railing, clutching it until their surroundings steadied down. The darkness had been replaced by a lowering, sullen-feeling gloom. They looked down as if from a high balcony onto a shadowed island, prisoned between chill rivers and studded with sharp spikes of iron and cold stone.